Bradford.
Yeah.
Nice meeting you,
Nice
I've
meeting
not
you,
met you
Kaylin,
before.
Yeah, I
Jefford.
never met before. Yeah, that's why everything is
Oh,
my input, ma. Since it's the first one, right? Everything
okay.
now I see
Ah,
becomes my input.
you must be quite a reader, I suppose.
Yeah, definitely. Reading is one of my
Yeah,
ways in which I cope with
Yeah.
things in
right,
life.
right.
Yeah.
It's my number 12, and I also read quite a fair bit. So I can imagine if it's your number one, you'll be like reading 100 times more than me.
I mean,
Yeah.
it depends. Some of the input also comes from conversations I have with people and just like talking
Mm,
to people, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, right. Like articles and books is my primary source of stuff which I go to lah.
mm.
Mm. Hey guys, so
Okay.
just
Yep.
let you know that we have started, we have gone live.
Mm.
So just like to thank you for joining us and welcome everybody else who is watching this on Facebook Live or even YouTube. So I've kind of started to move towards Quick Connect Live in lieu of my meetup group. So we actually have conversations here, and that's also good that all of us have our top 5 talent teams now put up on our screen, so we can reference it as and when we want to. And today's conversation is really about giving feedback. How do we give feedback? What is feedback like? How to prepare for feedback and things like this. So Ethan, Jeffeth, or Pilin, do you have anything to add or comments about feedback?
Giving
Jeff
it,
speak
right?
first. Yeah, giving feedback.
Giving feedback.
Um, okay, maybe I should give a bit of background about what I do. I am a corporate trainer. So there are, of course, various parts to the training. There's the communication, the presenting, the conversation bit, and then the feedback part. And of course, the affirmation and, which comes easily for me given I'm positive. Um, Honestly, because of my high harmony, right? The giving feedback part is the part that I least enjoy.
It's
Oh.
challenging, right?
It is like to me when I first started, it's almost like picking a fight lah. Like
Oh wow, it felt like you were picking a fight, or the other person felt like you were picking a fight.
I feel like I'm picking a fight. So
Okay,
it's a very uncomfortable thing for me to do, but it's something that I need to do. But of
interesting.
course, having trained for 10 years, it's a little bit more comfortable, but I wouldn't say I totally enjoy doing it. I think the main reason is, of course, because I'm an Enneagram type 9, who is also a peacemaker. My core motivation is to be at peace with the world and everyone around me.
Yeah, I think
So you can understand that it's a bit difficult for me because of my wiring. So giving feedback is almost like picking a fight. And of course, logically, I know, you give feedback, they improve, they do better. But for me, it's a bit uncomfortable to do.
right. So
Mm.
it's a bit uncomfortable for you because of the confrontation part, right? And actually, on Facebook, Ethan and I sometimes message each other, and he in one of my posts, he was saying that, oh, confrontation should be the norm,
Norm.
conflict is not. So we make a distinction between what is confrontation and what is conflict. So we were
Right.
just joking, right? We could probably do a session on confrontation without conflict, which would be an
Okay.
interesting thing to talk about maybe in one of our future sessions.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Okay.
Jeffeth, how is
Mm.
giving feedback like for you?
Well, I think it's to me. I mean, my view is definitely important for the person to receive feedback, right? Because that's probably the only way somebody knows what area in
Mm,
which they can improve upon or what
mm,
strength they could keep. At least for me, I when I give feedback, I on top of the things like sometimes you want to say like, oh, these are the things that you should improve and it's usually targeted at specific behaviors rather than the person
mm,
itself. uh, I also try to find a bit of gems in terms of what the person did well,
mm,
and those things I think is also worth highlighting.
mm.
I mean, some people call this the sandwich model, right? In which you give like the nice stuff,
Yeah,
and then before you give the not so pretty stuff, which you still want people to improve from the behavior.
Mm.
yeah.
Uh, so I think emotionally for me it's not that easy to say, oh, I want to give you feedback. I will definitely come and approach you to give feedback. I also need to think through okay, so what specific behavior the person did well that contributed to this particular situation or result that I'm now seeing. And of course, as nice, I would really say, oh, this is a feedback for you, and I mean, in a way, I will package it nicely so that it is really to help you to improve lah. I think I did it in. I mean, last time we used to do in Toastmasters, right? And now also in Toastmasters, and giving feedback is probably one of the key skills that we learn. On a team-based kind of feedback, you usually require an after-action review, right? And typically we say things like what went well and what could be better. So generally, I think I do have a structured. But you tell me about being comfortable with it. I would always say every time I think before I start, it wouldn't feel that comfortable unless I thought through specifically what we sort of think specifically or what to give the person the feedback about. And that helps a bit lah.
Yeah, excellent. So, Jeff, you actually covered some of the things that we have planned to talk about today, right? So, it's what Ethan calls the shit sandwich, right? When you need to give someone feedback.
I also use that, by the way. I use the what shit SHIT.
Shit sandwich, yeah.
It calls it the shit sandwich.
Okay, but I also have read somewhere there are some people who don't think that this works. I personally
Yeah.
use it, by the way. So I also want to hear your views, because I think one of the reasons why they think it doesn't work is when you say something nice, they know something else is coming.
Yeah.
So they are like not registering the good thing that you have said. They are just waiting for the punch to happen. So some of them prefer just punch me now. Don't. Yeah. So I'm also curious to know what's the best way. For me, I think usually when I give feedback, right, it's after a role play or they show me that what they are wearing. I would have to give them critique. I would rather they tell me what they think they need to work on to improve, so that it's easier for them rather than for me to tell them. So that's one of the way I get around giving very direct feedback. So whatever that they did not tell me, then I'll have to give it to them lah, in a nice way, of course.
So
Give it
what
to them.
your
But
approach?
yeah, in a nice way.
And then give it to you.
Of course, I will say it very nicely, gently, lovingly.
So I think Pili's approach is a little bit more like, rather than being direct with it, she tries to take a coaching approach, right? So let me ask you about what you think you can improve, rather than let me tell you about what you can.
Because I feel that as adult learners, once they hear you, they have the wisdom to tell you. So it's actually easier for them to tell you than I tell them, which I think if some of them are a little bit more emotionally sensitive, they get a little bit defensive, but yet they cannot fight you because you are the trainer. They'll just, okay, I will do something about it. They appear to look like they'll do something, but I don't know what's happening inside them. Like whether are they defensive or are they already shut down? So
They
those
might
are some
already have built the
questions.
Great Wall of China or whatever.
And like this sounds perfect for the active listening discussion also.
Yeah. So Ethan and I and a group of friends doing this active listening training. So it's under what Ethan and his friend Sean has been doing. It's called Dakota Wellness, and basically doing some training on how do we help to under reflective listening. Right, we're talking about how do we resonate with the emotions and validate the experience. It's almost like a tagline now for me.
Yeah.
So it is, right? So I just like, what did I learn about reflective listening? These were the two key things: resonate with the emotions and validate the experience as far as possible. And that's so when I do my practice sessions with Ethan and the group, that's the thing that I just keep in mind, right? Just keep trying to do that as much as I can. Maybe let's set the groundwork, right, in terms of what is the purpose of feedback, right? So maybe Ethan, you want to take that. What is the purpose of feedback?
So I think I'm just asking people to join us. Okay.
Come.
One of the key parts about this is that what's the purpose behind your feedback is a really key part about this thing where, so I just helped somebody do key feedback. Yeah, StrengthsFinder, yes, Ben. Yes, we're talking about StrengthsFinder here. So one of the hardest parts that people have difficulty with is setting the intention of the feedback. Because often the feedback is almost instinctive or reactive. It's also very often difficult for people to set the pace for it, because most of the time, especially in our Asian culture, right? Like, so all of us are Chinese here, so you have some other representations eventually. But one of the major parts about this is that we are not taught how to give proper feedback. And so, I mean, I just helped somebody with a feedback email just now. And setting the intentions is so key, right? Because telling the person, which is a caveat format, right? So it's like, why am I saying this to you? Why am I giving you this feedback? It's not to thumb you or to give you a hard time or to make you emotional. So that's where most people feel like most comments or feedback feels like, because most of the time when our parents tell us certain things, right, our first reaction is, why you tell me, right? Why you give this comment? It means I'm not good enough, is it? And that's the first reaction a lot of people have towards feedback. But once you set the intention in place, it is really important that, like, once you set the pace of why you say you're giving this feedback, it sets the pace for the rest of how your conversation can flow. And I think, so I just want to finish up with this. That's why I think NLP or some other systems that I've been discussing with you, Alex and Ariel, about, is that NLP always starts with a positive intention. So my goal is to reach where with you. It's a very good way of setting intention.
And one thing about NLP, when you talk about positive intention, it's also a assumption, or we like to call a presupposition, right? That behind every behavior is a positive intention. We just need to find it. And that kind of guides the way that we do interventions, or the way that we interact with people. So coming back to feedback, I think one of the things we need to realize is that feedback can be both positive and negative, right? Very often, the moment people think about feedback, they think, oh, it's a criticism. Or like for all of us that's very familiar with using the shit sandwich, right? It goes like, okay, there's a positive thing, but it's just to cushion the bad thing that's coming next. Right? So everyone has this mindset somehow that, oh, feedback tends to be negative. And that's also because we tend to have a negative bias, right? We always look for what's wrong rather than what's right. And that's what the whole strengths-based approach is about. It's about looking for what's right with people rather than what's wrong. So as we start to do that, I believe that feedback must fulfill a couple of purposes. One could be it's to correct and improve. So where the areas where you find the person can do better, you want to correct and help the person improve. But the other side, it is also to edify and encourage, right? Whereby someone does something well, or you want to encourage person, you want to tell the person, look, this is what you did well. And it doesn't always have to be followed by a negative thing. Because the moment that we constantly add a negative behind a positive, people start to expect it. And then you lose all sorts of impact from it.
That's why shit sandwich doesn't always work.
Yeah, it doesn't always work, and it actually negates any positive feedback that you have, right? I mean, if you've been giving that sandwich approach all the time, every time you give a good feedback, the person will wait for you to give the negative one after the good one, and that isn't effective. So maybe one of the things we can do after today, it's to simply look for what's right and just give people the positive feedback and say, hey, look, I noticed you did this. That was excellent. That was great. Fantastic. And just end it there. Right.
As a norm.
As a norm. Yes, as a norm. Right.
Yeah.
So if we use Clifton Strengths and the strengths-based approach, it's like what Gallup always say, a drop for your bucket, right? They believe that every interaction either adds to an emotional adds to an emotional level in your bucket, or subtracts from it. So every time you encourage someone and you have a positive interaction, it adds to that adds to your emotional bucket, right? Both for yourself and the other person. So I encourage you, if you want to use Clifton Strength, that's fine, right? So I could go to you, Pei Li, and say, hey, Pei Li, I realized that, you brought so much energy to the room, like today, right? The moment you spoke, and that really gets everybody going, and people are also more attracted to listen to us because there's so much positive energy going on, right? And I just end that.
Is that a true feedback?
Yeah, that's the true feedback. I will tell you every time.
I'm just wondering if it's a role play kind of thing. Thanks.
It's role play and
graciously
it's true.
accept it. Yeah, thank you.
So I think I think feedback really needs to be clear about the two purposes, to correct and improve, as well as to edify and encourage. And also for people to purposefully, like what Ethan says, as a norm, look for what's right and give people positive feedback repeatedly. I see Joelle has a question. While clarifying intention is indeed very helpful, I also have experienced individuals who have fragile confidence. So I think Paylin alluded to that. They may know the good intention, they may have solicited the feedback, but they may still feel uncomfortable. Do you guys think this is inevitable for some people? Any way we can mitigate it further?
I think, can I just hold it here in one bit, right? So if you notice, right, this is something I noticed about Singaporean culture versus other country culture. So in my experience, in Singapore culture, if you're as a musician, the applause is very minimal compared to other countries, right? So, and then in the middle of the song, or different things when a person does something right, is something that comes easily. So, and I'm also watching this, right? I'm also watching this video and each of you guys are talking, I'm like nodding away, and that's a form of feedback. If you look at it, right, when you're doing a training session, if nobody nods, how do you feel?
I have to start thinking positively.
Yes. So if there's a lack of feedback, it's actually a bad thing, right?
Yes.
So if the person has fragile ego, it means that they have not been affirmed enough of what is right before they even know what is wrong. So I think that's also one of the major things. As in what Alex has covered just now was beautiful in the sense that if you don't tell people what is right and you only tell them what is wrong, they're naturally going to have fragile egos. And I think this was a very interesting topic for me recently because I was exploring the concept of toxic masculinity and then also exploring into a concept where I call it toxic femininity, where your Nazi types of people are enforcing rules on other people of how they should behave. And when we talk about that, right, there's a lot of negative feedback, but no positive. Like, you've done that well, you've done this well, before you give the once in a while a negative feedback. So, and we talk about this thing about nurturing people, right? Nurturing people is validating their experience, validating their perspective, validating what they're having. When you give a compliment that is not genuine, that means a shit sandwich that is ungenuine compliment, shit, ungenuine compliment, you're not going to have a good reaction from people. Does it make sense?
I think it depends on, a lot also depends on how you say it. That means when you give the compliment, if you're able to say it in a sincere way and you're able to give good reasons to back up why what they did was good before the feedback, they might believe you, but then they might not believe you, depending on how close or how much they trust you as a person.
So I think that's a great topic. Like, talk about trust. Yeah, Jeffers?
Yeah, so I think beyond the giving the feedback as a technique, there's also like the quality of the relationship that exists throughout and is over time, right? And I think not in particular, there could be many things happening in the relationship or in the interactions, and it could be sometimes just giving praise, and sometimes like, hey, I noticed a great thing that you did there because the impact on me was this, and that's how I felt. And I think I suppose the thing is also like, is that normally the way you show up around people as well? Because if it is, and you give the feedback as you normally would, the way you show up, people can feel its authenticity. But if you suddenly all the while you are like controlling people, telling people this thing, pointing out their mistakes, then suddenly on the day of feedback, then you tell them these are the great things that you do, then of course there's a level of distance between how the people feel, whether their feedback is really authentic and whether I really accept it or not. So those are just a couple of thoughts.
So the impression that came to my mind when Jeffers was talking about it was, you give people positive feedback. It's like laying the carpet, right? So that when someone falls on it, they have that thing to cushion the fall, and they feel a bit safer. And the opposite is let them fall on the hard ground first, and then no matter how much cushion you pat on top of the person after you hit the floor, might not really help after that. So, sorry, that was the kind of image.
That's a great image.
So it just came when Jeffers was sharing it.
Alex, your love for metaphor, right?
Yeah, my
analogy.
love for metaphor. I was just laughing away.
Padded carpet.
Yeah, so the padding of constantly feeding and giving positive feedback then actually helps people to receive negative feedback better, right? Because they know what I've done well. You have actually added to their self-esteem, added to their confidence before you start to give them things that chips away at their self-esteem.
Yeah,
So,
and
yeah.
and that's the sort of the effect of it when you just be authentic in the relationship, right? Because I mean, if we do it with the intention of like to cushion it, then it sounds also a bit awkward, you see. So, but when we do it because that's who we are and we believe that giving feedback really helps you grow, and that's normally how I would show up in any kind of interaction. I think naturally, when you really give a structured feedback, people will feel that, oh, that's pretty similar, and I'm more than willing to receive, because all this while we have sort of that relationship, and it was an authentic conversation that we have. Uh, yeah. So the distinction between that is whether we do it because we want to cushion it, or we do it because it was authentic in the way I show up to begin with. So I think I just wanted to point that out. Yeah. So
It's very cool.
The other thing I wanted to add to giving feedback is oftentimes the more specific the feedback is in terms of behavior, so observable behavior, right? The better that feedback is. So, there's this story about this boss who every time walked past the secretary said, "Hey, great job, great job, great job," every day for a period of time. One day secretary got really, really, it's like it felt good for the first couple of times. But then after a while, she got totally confused, right? It's like, okay, good job for what? So one day she stopped the boss and said, "Hey, thanks for the compliment, but what exactly have I done a good job in?" And the boss was like lost, it's like it was a general compliment. So general compliments can sometimes be useful, but it has very limited impact on people, right? So the more specific we are with behavior, the better it is. And that actually leads us back to how do we then prepare for feedback, right? So when we want to give feedback, we need to make sure that you have at least identified like the intention. What do you want? Like what Ethan says, right? What's the intent of this feedback? What's the behavior that you have observed? What is the impact of that behavior, and how does it make you feel? So you can do this for both positive and negative feedback, right? And I like to use kind of a model. It starts with I observed, then what's the behavior that you have observed? The impact is, so what's the impact of that behavior? And what do you feel about it? So if I were to use that same model with you, Penny, just now, I would say things like, "Hey, Penny, I observed that every time you come in, you talk with such great high energy, and its impact is that it brings everybody else's energy up as well. And I really feel so encouraged to have you around for my meetups."
Oh, thank you.
How the model works.
That's a very nice thing to say.
Yeah.
I will
And
copy it down and frame it on the wall.
And this is recorded, so you can go back and watch it.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I find it interesting because as we're talking about this, right, I'm starting to realize that partly because of what the kind of person I am, I genuinely, by the time I give negative feedback, okay, so I do have the recognition that because I usually give a lot of positive feedback, like in general, I'm the person who is the first person to go, "Wow, nice, this is good. Like you did this well." Like this is the automatic sequence of my thought processes.
Right.
Well, actually, automatic sequence because I trained it when I was a bit younger.
Right.
And I realized that because it creates a lot closer relationships with people, it gets you to get people to recognize what you like and what you don't like. So when we go back to boundaries, right, like rewarding people emotionally for doing the right thing as a feedback is so critical. So like objectively, we're looking at this, right? Like for everything that the person says positively, I'm just gonna nod my head, and every time the person doesn't, I'm just gonna. It will create a certain kind of reaction in the person, right? So they know what to do more of or what not to do more of. I still remember there's this concert in Java Jazz that I was part of, that I was watching. And when the saxophonist was actually playing something and the crowd just woo, right? Like he will do more of that. And eventually the whole the whole performance just became him doing the same thing over and over again, but which is kind of annoying as a listener. But that's exactly what happens when you have positive feedback, right? You do more of that. Like if our parents told us, to do something and we do it and we get rewarded for it, would you do more of it? Right?
Yeah.
Like I always go back to parenting because it's also how our brains are trained, right? If your boss gives you a like a good job or a pat on the back every time you do something well, would you do more of that?
Yeah. So that's I hate to use the term behavior modification, right? It's like encouraging the positive behaviors that you want. And that's how feedback actually comes in to help. And I like what Ethan said about boundaries, right? So giving effective feedback is one of the useful ways for you to maintain your own boundaries. Right? So
True. Yes.
it doesn't have to be performance related. I mean, in a corporate context, it's usually performance related, right? This is how you do better, this is how you can improve. But on a personal kind of a level, that feedback of telling someone, look, you did this, I didn't like it. Right? And that level of feedback is important. It's like, I noticed that you've turned on the television really, really loudly. That actually affects me when I'm in my room doing my work, and I really feel frustrated. I'm using the exact same model, right? I observe, the impact is, and I feel, and I can give that same feedback to a person to let the person know, look, by switching on television too loud, it has a negative impact on me. Right? And we can follow up then by asking, making a request like, could you please turn it down when I'm working in the room, or could you please turn it down from this time to this time, which are working hours or whatever it is. And you can make a request to that person after the feedback. So it's really the same model, no matter how you use it. And we are joined by Ken.
Yeah, he's a friend of mine. Hey, why you
And he's gone.
He's a friend of yours and he disconnected.
Whose friend?
Yeah,
Alex's friend or
It's my
Ethan's?
friend,
Ethan's friend.
Yeah.
Oh,
So Ethan, as a feedback, what does that mean? The moment you said that it's your friend and then he left.
No, like he was still connecting audio, so it doesn't look like it's really anything. I think he tried to connect, but then maybe he has some problems with his phone. I don't know.
very good. You didn't jump to
Yeah.
conclusion. Excellent.
That's the awareness of the assumptions that we have.
Yeah.
So the feedback skill that we have really is very important, both in a personal context as well as the corporate context, that helps us to either help the team to improve and get better, or even for us to be able to enforce certain boundaries that we want other people to respect. And both of these are very important. A thought just came to mind, and I want to throw this to all three of you, right? Is there a difference in the way that you give positive versus negative feedback in terms of structure or whatever? And I'll explain why I asked that question after I hear from you.
Okay, can you repeat the question again? Sorry.
Is there a difference in the way you give feedback based on whether it's a positive or negative feedback? A structure or a form or something? Is there any difference between the structure you use?
Let me start with I think my easiest way of describing this is I need to be beyond reproach when I give a negative feedback.
Okay, so the mindset part. Okay.
Yeah, so I need to know that I've done my best and taken responsibility for my part. So it means like, okay, I've done this, I tried to adjust to you, it didn't work, and you keep on doing this. Therefore, like, so I will actually even go down to like the breakdown of like, if I give any negative feedback, that's how it comes. Usually I need to like wait for the right time, because what happens is that a negative feedback might not be that negative. I mean, the lack of positive feedback is usually my first negative feedback.
The lack of positive feedback.
Yeah, so like
of feedback again.
There's a trend, right? It's coming when Ethan doesn't say anything good about me. It's coming. It's brewing in the background.
That means I'm starting to consider what's going on, what's wrong, and everything. And then I'll start adjusting. And then what happens is that even if my adjustments don't work, at least I've made the step forward. Then I can bring it to the person and say, okay, so I've taken the responsibility on this grounds, but I don't see you taking responsibility on these grounds.
Oh, wow.
That's how I approach. So positive
it's almost
is the easy and automatic. Negative is after. Absence of positive.
But I also noticed that the way you said it, the positive and negative aspect of that feedback are related, right? So you have taken responsibility for this, you have not taken responsibility for that. You didn't say something like, "Oh, you look really good today," and you didn't take responsibility for that, which is totally non-related aspects of the positive and negative, right? So
Yep.
I guess when you sandwich it with relevant or rather information that actually matches, that actually makes the feedback a lot more palatable. And it also doesn't make it sound like you're giving you're not giving false compliments to cushion it, and people can tell. So that's probably one good way, right? I'm just hearing the way Ethan said and calling it.
I think I spent a lot of time learning how to give feedback because in our culture, giving feedback is not that normal. And even giving feedback positively, right? So I was judged for nodding too hard during one of the sessions where I'm the kind of person who do this, right? Because there was a gathering, right? And then somebody was sharing and nobody else was reacting. Everybody's like, the typical, when you have a gathering and nobody else is supposed to speak, but then, that person is talking, right? So I'm trying to engage the person to get them to share more. And then, so I nod vigorously because I'm across the room from them.
That's very nice of you.
And then what happens is somebody else judge me for like, why are you trying to attract attention? I'm like, I'm engaging the other person because otherwise the person feels like you're talking to a wall, right? So it's exactly that, right? So I'm a very forthcoming when it comes to positive feedback. And feedback is so important. So I had to learn it the hard way because a lot of people do not even give feedback on a basic level. Stonewall.
Yeah.
And that's
right.
And I love the way that Ethan handled that feedback, right? If you think about it, what the other person said about him was technically a form of feedback, actually more a form of criticism. And because fortunately, I think it's his self-assurance.
Self-assurance.
Right? Like, doesn't matter. So he just goes,
I can take it, give it to me.
I mean, he doesn't ask
That
for
was
it.
what I was thinking when I saw self-assurance. This guy is very confident. He can take anything thrown at him.
Teflon coating.
I
like
think so. But do you want to clarify that part?
My self-assurance is interesting, right? So my self-assurance, I think, is a result of the need to do things that are consistent with what I think is right. Like I have mild autism, so I think that for me is a major factor. So if I don't believe in doing something, I will never comment. I'll never do anything with it.
Where is belief for you?
Belief, let me because I literally have the app open on my phone. Hold on.
Awesome. He's been well trained.
No, because every time we come on here, I have to go into this. Belief is number 27. It's quite far down.
Okay, that's very interesting. I wonder where that's coming from. Okay, so back to the question. So for Ethan, when he's giving negative feedback, he needs to be above reproach, right? How about the rest of you? Is there a difference between the way you give or the way you structure your positive versus your negative feedback?
For me, normally I give feedback in the context of my training. I don't find myself giving a lot of feedback or negative feedback to friends. I generally only give positive feedback to my friends. So in training, when I need to give, I still use the sandwich approach for now. So when I need to give positive feedback, I am quite mindful to provide the evidence. Because I don't want to come across as I am trying to flatter you and it doesn't help anything, right? So I'm trying to say something nice to encourage the person and affirm the person, and I want to let them know what exactly they did well so that they will also believe what I say. Otherwise, they might be thinking, are you trying to make me happy so that when the negative feedback comes, I can receive it better? So when it comes to the negative feedback, we usually would feedback against the framework that we are teaching. So it's quite straightforward in that sense. So let's say if we are training, let's say etiquette, there's always like 3 principles they need to go through. So as long as they did the 3 principles in the role play, they are covered.
So it's very interesting for Paylene, right? Because she has positivity, woo, harmony. So she tends to gravitate towards the positive rather than the negative. And like you said, your negative feedback tends to make you feel like you're quite confrontational. So, but I'm also hearing the flip side, right? That if you tend to always be positive about everything, people start to doubt the authenticity of the positive feedback.
Yeah, that's actually my concern. but that's how I am, when I'm positive and I really look at you and I see all the good qualities about you. And I'm also a developer. I just want to tell the person how much I appreciate the person, what talents I see, what potential I see. But I'm mindful to do it in a way that is genuine and authentic. So this is something I'm trying to learn and hone, because I don't want to come across like some salesperson who is trying to sell people something and then saying everything good about the person. Like sometimes if you go to, let's say, the department store, you go into a boutique, you put on a shirt, and then that shirt to you doesn't look really good, right? But the sales girl tells you that, hey, you look very good. And every shirt that you change into, you look extremely handsome. That comes across like after a while, you're thinking, okay, I'm not sure whether or not that feedback is genuine. So I don't want to be that way. So I'm quite mindful in a sense about if I encourage you, I want to know where you did well.
And actually for Pei Ling, because she has positivity, her benchmark tends to be that way. She tends to, I think the example that you gave just now about, the person looks good in almost everything that he wears probably sounded like an incident that happened to you, that largely you think the person looks okay because generally positive about things.
Actually, that happened to me. I was the shopper, the customer. So of course when the sales girl say that, oh, you're quite happy, but if after you hear it like after 5 times, then you start to wonder, I'm not so sure whether I should be believing this.
Yeah, and so the relationship, right? Because now you don't know whether the person was honest or whether the person was just getting you to buy.
Yes. So, but of course, I will not say anything lah. I'll just smile and be nice about it. Social graces.
That's true. How about Jeff? Positive versus negative feedback. Any difference for you?
For me, my thinking is usually quite structural. Like, so I have the framework that whatever is consistent in the negative, if you spot what your observation is, what's the impact, and what your suggestion is, I will use the same for the positive as well. The only thing I did, I would give space more is giving people time to respond to what I said about the feedback. So whether they agree, disagree, or what's going on. So I don't know whether maybe a learner part of me or input that consistently look for like is my perception just my perception, or actually you really have something going on that I don't know about, and I really want to give you that space to acknowledge that bit. Maybe you really had a hard time that's happening at home, and maybe that's why it's showing up this way. But then depending on what the person might say, maybe the person say for compassionate reasons something's happening at home, then maybe my suggestion would be now at least I know about this situation, then we can take something forward from there lah. So it's also not in the sense whereby I just throw you the feedback and then the person has to accept it. I always give space for people to respond. The other thing is also in terms of, if let's say I know the person for some time and I could spot strength, I would point that out. So like I noticed that you tend to be very as in I noticed that every time when it comes to process related enquiries, you are very quick to respond. What's going on there? Is there a preference in terms of maybe this type of task that interests you? So that's where I'll start to navigate towards that, and I start to explore. And then sometimes I hear people get excited over it, and that might be something I know that okay, next time it helps me in terms of like, okay, this type of work, maybe you could do something more of that, right? So that's how as I explore feedback, I also explore where people's strength lies and where else we can work together more effectively lah. But to answer back your question, I think in general the same structure I use it. I don't differentiate.
Okay.
So that's
yeah. So I like what Jeffer said about bringing strengths in, right? So even when you're talking about a weakness or something to improve, using the strengths in terms of the talents can also help to spin it towards the positive, right? So if someone is unstructured, right, it could be due to adaptability. So it's not that this person is unstructured, it's this person is very flexible and needs change. So it actually helps to reframe it pretty well. Okay, so the reason I asked that question is that I remember reading or hearing it in a program once about positive versus negative feedback and the way that we can change the level of how do I say, is this the way that we tag the information. So for example, when you're talking about negative feedback, you tag the feedback at the behavioral level. And when you're giving positive feedback, try to tag it at the identity level.
I disagree with that.
You disagree with that?
So interesting.
Okay, so let me finish the three things and then we can go there, right? So it's a general rule of thumb. So try to tag negative to behavior, try to tag positive to identity. So it's like that was unhealthy behavior, or that and you are a health conscious person, right? So different level of tagging. The other one is to tag negative feedback to the temporal, and to tag positive feedback to the permanence. So meaning that, you made a mistake this time, versus you are usually, or you are always considerate. So kind of different tagging to the temporal versus the permanence. And there was one more, and I lost my train of thought. So I remember there were three. So identity versus permanence versus temporal, behavioral versus identity. And permanent. Okay, I can't remember. It will come back to me. But basically, that's what I meant, right? If we start to tag the information that we provide for positive and negative at different levels, you could have different types of impact. But I'm hearing that Ethan disagrees with some part of it.
My disagreement here is that any form of identity tagging is a form of so I find it interesting because okay, so I think because I'm looking at it on like chain level, right? So once I confirm an identity on a certain level, I recognize it as kind of enabling the person, not necessarily empowering the person.
Explain.
Okay, so if I say that you did this and therefore you're a considerate person, maybe it's like I find you a considerate person because you did this. That's okay, versus you are a considerate person. That's very different, huh? If I say that this behavior tells me that you're a considerate person, but when you act inconsiderately, it might not mean that you're not a considerate person. But if I confirm the considerate identity, the person will struggle if they act inconsiderately. And that is something that I see regularly for people because it's a very powerful guilt tripping tool. And that's when you tag it to the identity, they become attached to the identity. That means I have to always be considerate around you. I always have to be like this around you. If I reward a behavior, says that I think that's a very nice thing that you did there. Thank you for being considerate. I don't necessarily tag it as his identity. It creates a general thing where I'm rewarding the behavior, not just the identity level. Because if I keep on tagging it with the person, I'm trapping the person with a considerate identity.
So they feel that there is no exception, right? They always have to be 100% considerate to Ethan. Otherwise, I'm no longer a considerate person. I'm a, I don't know what.
Yes, and it creates a certain amount of distress in the person. I think this is because of my love for understanding traumas, right? So my understanding of all those things brings me to this level where any confirmation of identity can create attachment that can create worse problems. And that's on my level. So I'm thinking of multiple chain levels down. But if you're talking about immediate moment, it makes the person feel good.
Okay.
So I don't know, I just want to build on Ethan's point. I think in the same way when we talk about if we build based on identity level, how does the person know what good behaviors to keep, basically, right? So I think that's probably comes up to me because you also want to encourage like, okay, this is something good that you did and it really impacted the team or impacted me as a person, and a person needs to get feedback about this as well. So I don't know whether by tagging it at identity level means that you just say, oh, you are let's say you are Ethan's example, you're considerate, but actually I don't know what did I do that was considerate. So if you say things like maybe you maybe you said something nice or you ask me hello and you ask about and check in with me in the morning, and that felt good, right? That's the behavior, right? This morning, and I felt cared for, and therefore I think that makes you a considerate person. Then at least there's certain distinction in terms of what the person did that gives a certain feedback about a behavior. So that's probably only what came out from me now as we talk about identity
Cool.
tagging.
I agree.
I think when we mention it at identity level, it doesn't mean that we don't call out the behavior. I think the being specific about the behavior feedback is still important. I think, after mentioning the behavior, is if you start to tag it at the, that you are a considerate person, or I think you're considerate, or whatever it is, it helps to reinforce at the identity level. But I mean, Ethan makes a good point too, right? That, do we then guilt trip the person into certain behaviors because of the way that we have given that feedback? And that actually never occurred to me, and probably just need to think through a little bit on that as well. How about the permanence versus temporal differentiation? Is that useful?
I think everything is temporal to personally. It's like, I don't like the idea of trapping a person. Like, what is good today might not be good tomorrow. And the permanence thing is, I find it manipulative in a negative sense.
Right.
Because it seems to want more of that from the person regardless of context.
Okay.
So you did this, you bought lunch for everybody today. Like that's a very considerate thing for you to do. But then, and I say, like, you're generally so considerate. I've seen people who use this manipulative method of controlling people by using that as the language. So what happens is that it creates a lot of habits where people start doing that more and more because they want to be seen as considerate and say it's a permanent thing. It does give a lot of like guilt elements for me. Like that's it's just a way of like, the moment you say anything is permanent, you're also not giving them a way out. I cannot be not good. I cannot be.
Yeah, but okay, so I mean, if you come back to the food example, right? Say, hey, Ethan, thanks for buying food for us. You're always so considerate. Does this sound manipulative?
It can be.
But does it sound manipulative to you when I said it that way?
You do realize, again, I've self-assurance, so
He has a different lens.
He cannot be manipulated.
But Alex sounds very genuine, I feel.
Yeah,
I
but
would just
Alex,
take it graciously.
The way Alex says things, I can take it because that's Alex also. Like, it's very Alex thing to say. But that's also because of the consistency that he does things. I think one of the key parts here is that if I've actually dealt with a person and know what they're looking for, I'm okay with it. Does that make sense?
Does that mean you have trust? You trust the person?
Yes,
you trust the person, even if, because you have trust for the person, even if he says something that to you seems a bit manipulative, you are quite happy to still oblige.
Yes, in that sense.
Yeah.
And then if I trust that the person still has the best intentions in mind, that's great. So that's why giving feedback requires intention, right? Because the general intention of the person is consistent. Then Alex saying it, okay, I'm fine. But if it's a new person who has never given any compliments before, says this, and I don't know anything about this person, imagine how it might sound.
Yeah, it sounds very fake, right? So it's like if I saw Ethan for the first time, I was a new, let's say I was a new member of the team, and Ethan buys me food for the first time. I go to Ethan and say, hey Ethan, thanks for buying me food. You're always so considerate. Ethan will go like, I known you for a day.
I think I will fall into that trap, because I'm very encouraging. Even if I met you for the first time and you did something good, I feel I need to call it out. But I wouldn't say that you are always, because the term always will not apply. I would say, oh, that's a very lovely gesture.
Yeah, see, that's specific, right? That's a lovely gesture. So it's a behavior.
Yep.
Yeah, so I
So
wouldn't say you are always this and always that because I don't know you well enough to say it.
yeah,
Yeah.
so I think like what Ethan's mentioned is about consistency, right? If you generally have multiple interaction like me and Alex, right? Then of course I know you enough to say you're always so helpful or
Yeah.
and therefore it makes sense, the context makes sense.
Yeah.
But also I think there's something missing also is the sayer who says it must feel that is a genuine feeling in which I give that. Because otherwise
Yes.
then people can feel I know in certain sense people can feel the vibes that it is not it is not like a authentic something like that.
Very
So
You know,
true. People
yeah.
can sense it whether you are sincere or not in your
Yeah, but if
comments.
you truly, I think if you truly felt that, I think it's okay to say because it's a genuine feeling that you feel about it.
yeah, and in NLP we call it congruence, right? So when something is inconsistent with something else, whether it be the words versus your body language or your tone, people feel it, and there's something uncomfortable about incongruence in terms of the communication to another person. So if your incongruence is communicated in your feedback, then people get more defensive, and trust is eroded, and the impact generally doesn't really come across as intended.
That is a little bit disastrous in the sense sometimes the person giving the feedback is uncomfortable. I'm sure there are managers who feel that, giving feedback is quite stressful. So they may find that they are trying to say this and then their body language is uncomfortable and yet the other person is misunderstanding them and taking it badly. So it's a little bit disastrous in that sense when that happens.
So actually, one of our earlier conversations, we talked about assumptions, right? And we talked about stating assumptions, or at least a bit of self-disclosure, and how that can actually remove some of these issues that Pilin just mentioned. So if a manager was uncomfortable and conscious of his discomfort, then one of the ways that he can very easily build trust by being vulnerable about it is like, I'm not very comfortable giving feedback, and but this is my feedback for you. I hope you take it this way. My intent, like Ethan says now, setting intention, right? So my intent is this and not that. So sometimes being clear about what you're saying and what you're not saying is actually very useful. And that level of consistency actually helps to build trust and paves the way for feedback, right?
Okay, so it pays to be authentic and just acknowledge that you're not very comfortable with doing this.
So it comes back to trust and vulnerability are intrinsically are very much related and tied, right? So the ability to be vulnerable. So even when we did the 5 dysfunctions of a team, we talked about trust not as in predictive trust, but vulnerability-based trust, right? So the ability to be vulnerable and to show where you are with people generally builds trust. And when you have that, the congruence, the consistency, the trust tends to follow after that.
I think to add on to it, I think it's also like the compassion to sort of be with a person when, let's say, a person is not feeling that great. I mean, in a sense, there are moments where people are just high and low moods, right? Throughout days and weeks. I think if you were sort of like compassionate enough to check in with people, generally by the time you give the feedback, they are quite open and receptive because in the same sense you come across as consistent. But if you only like prop up during the mid-year report or mid-year conversation or end-year conversation, now of course people is unlikely to want to receive it well lah. So I think that comes from that trust because of that compassion that you first extend towards people.
Yeah, so that's one of the things, if we come back to corporate, right, of why most organizations that only have a mid-year and final year review for feedback and have no feedback in between the rest of the year, that tends not to bode well. People tends to think that it's all a show, it's just for HR purposes, and your feedback becomes worthless. Probably something right up the alley for Ethan, since he's doing the office matters, right? That's what Tom means, by the way, for those who are watching. So Tom is not Ethan's new boyfriend. It stands for the office matters. So the office politics and stuff is one of pet topics for Ethan. So Ethan, maybe you want to talk about the whole feedback, consistency, loop, mid-year, final year thing.
Okay, so I think I think culture measures more of that. Culture measures like it's really about the individual parts. How to describe this? Culture is about your daily interactions, and your yearly, mid-year kind of
Mm.
assessments don't is rarely, okay, let's put it here, rarely honest. It's about the recency effect. It's about the last argument I had with you or the last conversation I had with you. And therefore, it's like an examination, right? It's like yearly examination. You have mid-year. It's just to test your knowledge at the time. But I might be scoring all the tests perfectly and I just fucked this test. What happens?
Yeah.
So especially when you talk about this, and then there's a lot of opinions in mind. And then remember, humans are humans.
Yeah.
So no matter what happens, I'm still going to have to struggle with the fact that communication will go down the drain very quickly. And so that creates all these different difficulties that will appear in conversations and in the yearly or personal assessments. So culture matters a lot more than your performance review. The performance review is more like a way of measuring. And measurements is always incomplete. Let's be frank here, measurements are always going to take a segment of what you did and what you're going to do and then give it to the person. And like if the person's a great culture lead, right? The person is, I call it a spark, right? The person who sparks the whole office, the person who lights up the whole office. How do you put that in performance review? Right? The person hit KPIs. Unless you put it into your KPIs, that the person brings up the mood of the room. Again, how many companies will do that, right? So it's all these little things that will get missed out in the performance assessment. But what makes a person valuable and what's good about feedback on a regular daily level is that you reward the right things, because there's all the intangible stuff that is required for an office to run properly. And that's what I care about. Like, it's not about the performance review, your ENPS, your StrengthsFinder results, so that you have a coaching training, and then after that, what happens? There's no communication on this class. It's your daily activities that matter. It's your daily interactions that matter. It's not just about performance assessment. And that's a pet peeve of mine.
Yeah, I noticed how your energy and your pace of speaking just went off the charts when you were talking about it.
That's what he's very passionate about, I think.
Yeah, I can definitely see the degree of passion you have. So, in fact, I lost my train of thought.
You're so wowed by him that you
everything off my head now.
you forgot what you wanted to say. That's the thing about passion, right? They hit you in the face and then you forget what you want to say anymore.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, this is about performance and stuff. But I think that we need to separate between performance measurement as well as development in workplace, right? So, I mean, your mid-year and your final year could in fact be just like what Ethan says, measurement of performance, but there needs to be that consistent interaction, right? We keep coming back to consistency, that consistent interaction that allows us to develop and grow.
Yeah. So
Right.
there's one thing that I think is, I mean, in a more realistic sense, is during your interactions, there's also a point of time where you will need to hold your feedback, because depending on what comes up from the conversation, somebody comes up at that moment really just needed a listening ear, and really just having a really shitty day, right? And we need to just have somebody to listen, and I think the common sense tells you that that's probably the right time to listen and show compassion first. Then
Yes.
once things get better for that person, but I mean, naturally people goes well, right? It's just like a cycle. Then after that is the receiving feedback becomes more open. But if you want to go by your structure and say, sorry, this is the time we allocated, and this is sorry, enough of your story, and I have to allocate this time to give you the next part. This is what you did not do so well. Then I don't know. My feeling tells me that like this person is not caring at all, and naturally things don't go well. So in a sense, I'm saying is like I think like Ethan was also mentioning, is a people business, is a daily interactions, right? And most of us has mentioned, and through daily interactions, there's also a bit of a, how to call it, a dynamic dance between the interactions that you have, and also depends on what comes up during that moment. You have to react to what makes sense at that moment. And sometimes it's about caring, showing support, encouragement. Sometimes it's about, okay, probably not performing up to task, maybe to nudge a bit of growth here, right? So that's something. Yeah.
So, Jeffers, what you just said, comes very naturally to you. And I was just reflecting about my own response towards feedback and actually the way I respond to people. And I, in fact, wrote about it in one of my Facebook posts about validation, right? So in the past, when I used to listen to people, and there are some people who are sharing, and I immediately go to problem solving mode, right? And I go like, okay, so this is the feedback, you could do this, you could solve this. And I reached a point where I realized some people were not interested in change at that point of time, but they were only looking for validation, right? So for me, I used to get very put off by these people. I go like, hey, like these people aren't interested in feedback or change. They just want to rant and they just want, and I go like, he's just only looking for validation. And for me at that point of time, it was kind of almost like contempt, it's like, oh, this person not interested in change, just like to talk. And it was only recently, right, when I was doing this listening training with Ethan, that I learned about the different stages the person goes through. There's pre-contemplative and contemplative, and that the listening and validation of a person, we spoke about it earlier, right? Resonating with their emotions and validating their experience. I realized that the validation of a person's experience, or at least the ability to listen and let them rant, brings them to a place whereby they are open to feedback and change. Right. So for me, that was the learning point recently, and I realized that I needed to do the listening, the validation, and the resonance a bit more. And with that, I thought maybe Ethan, you can elaborate a little bit more about the contemplative, pre-contemplative. I know we cover that, in every one of our active listening trainings, but that's.
Can I ask something before Ethan comment?
Yeah.
Actually, I'm very curious. Alex, because you're high empathy, right? So whatever you described earlier doesn't, it sounds to, because high empathy people are usually very empathetic and they will listen. And so it feels like not natural for you not to do that.
So I also have individualization.
Individualization.
I have developer, I have strategic. I also have analytical. I also have restorative. So restorative is 11 for me. Analytical is 12. So one of the things that I very quickly get into is, okay, I get what you're feeling. I see the problem. I hear the problem. This area that can improve. This is how I analyze it. Let's go.
Okay. Do you think it's also because you are used to reacting that way in the corporate environment where, we need to solve problem fast? And the feelings part, maybe, I get it, but let's move on and solve the problem.
So that's the thing about the empathy talent team, right? Empathy talent team is about people who are able to sense what other people are feeling, right? It's not about being empathetic, which is kind of different, right? So empathy as a talent team just basically means, oh, I can feel that this person is feeling very frustrated now, or I can feel this person is feeling a certain way, right? So I can resonate, or at least I can feel what the other person is feeling. But whether or not the other person feels I have resonance with them depends on my skill set in being able to deliver that, right? So that's why different strengths, we differentiate between the talent as well as the skills and knowledge that leads to strengths. So I may have the ability to kind of understand, oh, this is probably what that person is feeling right now, right? But if, let's say, that person himself isn't aware of the emotions that they are having, and I bring it on too quickly, I actually don't create resonance, right? I may even create a fight-flight response because the person, A, maybe not aware of how he's feeling. It can be quite strange, right? We kind of know what someone else is feeling before they do. Or B, it is something they're feeling, but they're not ready to reveal it. And when you suddenly reveal something that they aren't ready to reveal, they then experience amygdala hijack, right? They start to go like, oh shit, how does this guy know what I'm doing, what I'm feeling? And then instead of helping the person,
scary.
Right? So,
if they trust you, it's fine. If they don't trust you, then it's a bit like, yeah.
What else does he know? Then they
So
start to get very defensive.
Yeah.
Empathy as a talent team helps me to understand that, but I still need the necessary skills, knowledge that amplifies my empathy so that it becomes a strength.
Okay.
Yeah. So in Clifton Strengths, that cuts across all the talent teams, right? Your talent is a talent. It's a recurring pattern of thinking, feeling, or behaving that can be productively applied. You need the necessary skill sets knowledge in order to bring it across to make it a strength. So for me, even though I have empathy, I'm not always empathetic. It's kind of difference. And
Yep, I know that very well.
Thanks.
Because he knows you have high assurance, you don't need it. Maybe, I don't know.
My
Just guessing.
self-assurance quite low, you know. So I'm totally crushed by him. So
See, that's a feedback for you, Ethan.
but I have learner. I will learn and I'll improve. So that's where I'm coming from, right? And I thought that that became a learning point for me, that look, I can know what a person feels, but it's like, let's move on and get on with it. So the learning of the skill of validation was something I came across a couple of years back. Then the learning of the pre-contemplative and contemplative phase, as well as the importance of how to resonate with people in order to get them to a place where they can move. That was quite recent for me in terms of learning. So maybe Ethan, you can talk about the pre-contemplative and contemplative phases. And
Yep. I'm just allow me screen sharing, Nick.
There you go.
Okay, cool. I need to look for my decoder. Okay, cool. All right. Lecture time. No, kidding.
Thank
so
you,
I think
Ethan.
so this is where it's fun, because this actually this process is actually for addiction processes. So what most people don't realize is that addiction processes is very similar to how we create habits. Some people who cannot, once they wake up in the morning and they don't brush their teeth, they're foul for the whole day. Or once they don't have the coffee in the morning, they're foul for the whole day, right? These are actually withdrawal symptoms from addictions, actually. So there are certain things that psychological addiction processes that a lot of people don't recognize that they have. So why is it that people always eat too much food whenever they're feeling down? Because there's a form of addiction for them to manage their issues. So there's this thing called tolerance, which means increasing in, you need more of the same thing to feel the same good. And then there is that addiction process. So some people who overeat is usually because they're actually addicted to food. So when we talk about this, right, addiction cycle is very, very key to look at how people think. And so whenever we look at this, right, there is always a phase where there are pre-action. So we call it pre-action and pre-choice. So before I made a choice to change, because I don't want to change, I don't think that I have anything wrong. Like, so if you talk to an alcoholic, let's just take for example, an alcoholic doesn't think he's an alcoholic and therefore doesn't think that he needs to change. He doesn't think that alcohol drinking affects him or the people around him or his life. That's actually one of the key reasons why a lot of people who are alcoholics or addicted to certain things don't see the need for change. So it's the same as why people who watch too much Korean dramas cry all the time and don't seem to get their life together because they rather distract themselves from reality, is because they're pre-contemplative, right? So that is where majority of people are going to be in life, in almost everything in their life. So when we talk about the confirmation of identity, for me, there's a certain part of this is you're enforcing the pre-contemplative behavior. So so when we look at this, they are unaware of the real problem that I'm willing to explore. So when we look at like active listening or therapy or different processes, what we're trying to do is move people down this path. So you need to make a choice to want to change. So therefore, contemplative. So then you start looking for the root. What happens, that preparation phase is where you start preparing to take action. So this is after you've done enough research, you know what to do, right? So some people in contemplative mode look for cultures, look for different models or different ways of looking at things to be able to figure out what to do. Once they've chosen something, they go into preparation mode. Once they go into preparation mode, they can start taking action once they feel more ready. And then they go into maintenance. Maintenance is when you relapse and you need to go back to figure out what's wrong, rejig yourself. And there's this process called termination where you don't feel the addiction anymore. So there are people, quite rare, who, after they have gone through Alcoholics Anonymous, they stop drinking, they can drink without feeling addiction anymore. That's called termination, right? That's where I can stay sober or I can drink a bit, but I wouldn't want to drink too much. So that means the trigger and the trauma is gone. So this is the process in which is required for most people to go through. And that's why when we give certain types of feedback and different phases for different people, right? Maybe validation is all the person needs to learn to change. So this is what I think Alex was talking about, the power of validation. If you don't validate their current experience, they will never consider change. No matter what feedback you give them, there will be no change. And that's why I also talked about how if I'm constantly rewarding people for the right behavior, you validate the right things. Eventually when you give the feedback about the wrong things, or not useful things to be exact, not wrong, not useful, it gives you this opportunity for the person to go, okay, maybe I should review how I want to do. And this gives the person a choice. And I like what Jaffa said, right? I give the person time to react and respond. I give the person space to tell me that I'm wrong. Now that's very key in giving feedback, right? Like I can be wrong as I'm giving you the feedback, because then you can tell me, no, I'm completely bullshitting to me, that I'm wrong, and it's completely bullshit because that's the intention, that's exactly what happened, and I didn't know what's happening throughout the whole time, which is fine. And that's why in this whole process, right, the validation is so key. If I don't validate people and give them the space to feel that they're valid for what they're thinking and doing or feeling, I'm never going to get the right response out of them to tell me what is the real story. What is it that they're experiencing to be able to give a more constructive feedback?
Yeah. And so Jeffrey didn't exactly use the term validation, right? So he talked about how, we need to make sure we know when to give people feedback and at other times to just listen. Right. So Jeffrey, I think that's what you said. So the model then came to me that, if the person is at the pre-contemplative stage, feedback doesn't work for them, right? Because they're not interested in feedback. You need to listen to them and validate them in order to at least get them to the contemplative stage, whereby they can start listening to feedback. So I'm just trying to link, Jeffrey, what you said earlier to this, of why, sometimes you just simply can't give feedback effectively because that person isn't ready to hear it, right? Ethan, I got that right?
Yeah. I'll agree with you. And that's why it's, for me, your preparation for feedback is more important than your feedback itself.
I agree with you.
Yeah, let me just stop the sharing so that we can go back to our faces.
Awesome. So I think, the understanding of where that person is and whether the person is ready for feedback, or the way that we cushion, and I think like what Ethan says, prepare for the feedback, becomes important, right? The level of consistency, the trust that we have, how specific we are in terms of behavior, having all those in mind actually becomes very important. What's the intention, the intentionality of the feedback, are all part of the preparation of giving feedback, right? So once you have all those pieces in place, then your feedback that you deliver can be more effective. The other thing about preparing for feedback that we didn't mention was so time. I think time is alluded to in terms of whether a person is ready, but when is a good time to give the feedback? Venue is important, right? So where do you choose to give the feedback? Right? Is it quiet environment? Is it conducive? Is it a good place to give feedback? And the other thing about feedback, lost my thought, is so there's time, there is place.
How about mode of communication?
Is it
yes.
Necessarily. That's it.
Oh, okay. Like, can you actually do it over WhatsApp? Or not a good idea?
Yeah. So the medium of communication again becomes very important, right? And interestingly, our next Quick Connect Live is about giving feedback online that we're supposed to do next week. So
okay.
The medium definitely does make a very big difference in terms of the feedback, also because of the amount of information that gets lost, right? So if it's face-to-face, you have body language and everything. But if I WhatsApp the person, the tonality, the pace, everything is assumed by the person reading it, right? So how do you get that? And definitely the medium is an important piece of how do you decide to communicate. So that's what I had in mind in terms of preparation. I think those were things that once we were clear, you know how to prepare for it, you have intentionality, you know what to look for, behaviors, you have a structure, which we talked about, right? So I observe the impact is, I feel, and things like that. I think that actually covers a huge part of giving feedback. I mean, does anyone else have something to add? So, good. Okay. So, Ethan, recently, people start talking about feedback versus feed forward?
Oh yes, I read that also in I think one of the coaching framework that is it one of this famous coach in the States.
So Ethan is giving
Feed
that.
forward.
that
When I told my
shaking head.
husband about this, he was like the same reaction as Ethan. He felt that it's just call it what it's supposed to be, call a spade a spade. So
I mean, I'll be honest with you. All this words, it's
feed
like
forward.
we need to be agile. We need to be, forward thinking. We need to be visionaries. Oh God. Okay, shut up. Okay, sorry. my
No,
my
because
honest
the
feedback.
word feedback, right? It's I don't know whether it's a trigger for some people.
Mm.
So when you use the word feedback, already the mind gets into this.
Okay, mentally challenged, for example, right? The concept of mentally challenged, the concept of retarded. Retarded was created as a word to be able to negate the effects of mentally challenged.
Mm. Okay, so I mean, there's a difference between just changing the word to give it a different meaning, right? So, like okay, this is live, but I shall still say it. So, for example, in the past, when we had flooding in Singapore, and someone came out and said that wasn't a flood, that is ponding. I went
I was
like,
from PUB, I can tell you.
It's called
Don't call it
euphemism.
bonding.
It's called euphemism, right? So it's called a euphemism. So like that sounds like a complete euphemism. That's like you're trying to downplay something with a more positive word, but it's the same thing for me. It's like how in
Okay.
all these conversations, right? Like I think this is again another peeve of mine. I have a lot of peeves. One of the major factors about this is changing the name doesn't change anything. I mean, like it's okay. So I go into etymology of words. So I go into like, what is loyalty? What is like, for example, loyalty literally means blindness. What is worship? It literally means blindness. Like it is attached to the original meaning of the original word. So when we try to come up with new names without the understanding of the original etymology and what's happening, it's very different. So feedback as a concept is, I mean, if we talk about it as the way the word says, is feedback is talking about history to give a response, to give what I'm actually giving you as a critique or as an assessment of what just happened. Great, right? So it's if I can set an intention, that might be feed forward, right? So I want us to have a better relationship. Therefore, I'm giving you this feedback. But if we always come up with new terms to just create new ways of looking at things, I mean, I'm just struggling. Like, because agile framework, for example, is just creativity. I'm sorry, like, or fast thinking, like, or all these kind of things of describing the same thing just with a different name.
Okay.
Yeah,
So-
that's my take.
feedback, feed forward, no difference, Ethan. Jeffers, I mean, is it the same thing for you? Any distinction?
I mean, similarly, they're made up, right? The words, right? In that sense. I tend to take a more neutral approach. Maybe it's not neutral, but in the sense that they are probably made up at the time, even like feed forward, depending on what use it is used for, and if its outlive its usefulness, then therefore, new forms need to come up, right? I mean, all these like agile thinking didn't really come out until the last 10, 20 years, and there's just sporadic rise of new frameworks and models which sometimes almost mean the same thing, just pieced differently. I think it's more important to understand the nature of where this comes from rather than get sucked into the, let's say, the specific framework, because if you get stuck into it, you try to think they are different but they're not so different. Going back to the feedback or feed forward, I guess it goes back to the intention and what the intention was supposed to be lah. So if let's say I use feed forward and people smile and great, right? So great, I think it works out. But I use feed forward and people were like, oh, this guy just mumbo jumbo with new terminologies to make it fancy. Yeah, of course, I think that's a useless word at that moment lah. So end of the day, I'll still go back to the original intention in which we set out to do lah. So that's my view.
Yeah, I think it'd be very strange to go to someone and say, "Hey, can I give you some feed forward?"
Yeah.
We'll go like, "Eh? what the hell?" Right? It's like usually in corporates or organizations we have a retreat. where people go back and they start to think about it. Some people have started calling it an advance
Yeah.
because
Oh, yes.
it's like, oh, we're going for an advance. What?
Not
So
department retreat, but department advance.
yeah, you heard of that before, right? It's almost
Yes,
becoming a
yes.
thing now, right? We're not going for a retreat, we're going for advance. So for me,
Some people roll eyes, but yeah.
because it's just changing the word.
But I love it because I just want to, and because my friend just messaged me, hi Evan, because he's watching the video and he's telling me that I also create a lot of terms. I'll be frank, and no, that's very true. I do, and it's only because I'm finding a lacking term. So I'll spend like a good 1-2 months looking for the term in English and find that it's not existent. Therefore, I create a new term. But then when we talk about this kind of feed forward feedback, I mean mechanics.
Yeah. So I think Ethan,
I'm so shy to say, actually, I like the feed forward.
and I like the feed forward
But I'm just
too.
going to
We'll
tell
talk
you
about it. It's great, it's great.
it
I
sounds
love that feedback.
positive.
I like the feedback.
Yeah. Okay, so Ethan, the reason why you came up with a different word is because there's a distinction in your head that was different from existing words, right? So you wanted to come up with something else to make that distinction.
Even for etymology, so meaning like the origin of the word itself. For example, why I came out with the word anti-values, for example, is because we don't actually have that term. I tried looking for terms that are the opposite of values, and there's nothing, right? And so most of my terms, actually, most of the terms I use are from technical psychological terms that like id, ego, super ego. So I talk about framing, which is from technical words. So these are the words I tend to use, but for people, it might be a new term. But for me, it's like I'm using a technical psychological term most of the time. The only words I've really created are like anti-values.
Yeah. I mean, you use a lot of jargons, right? So people who are not familiar with the jargons go like, hey, what are you talking about?
Yeah, but feed forward for me is like
okay, so let me explain where I see the difference between feedback and feed forward, right? And it could pretty much still be part of feedback. It's just that when we talk about it, it helps people make a distinction and then change their behavior in terms of how they give feedback or feed forward. So oftentimes feedback is very past focused, right? So it goes and it's very focused on, especially for negative feedback, right? What was wrong? So it goes like, oh, you did this, impact was bad, and I feel terrible. And you stop there, right? And that's the feedback. So it can leave a person stuck in the past or a bit lost as to what to do. So feedback is more of, oh, in the future, in NLP is future pacing, right? So in the future, when this happens, if you're going to coach, then you ask the person, what could you do differently? Or you could make a suggestion if you're giving feedback in terms of, maybe the next time that you are doing this might be helpful. So I think that's the difference between feedback and feed forward for me, right? If I make the distinction, that one is a lot more backward. You can get stuck in the past, whereas feed forward is learning to link whatever information that you have from the past and then bring it to a future state and saying, look, looking forward, you can't change the past, but when you look forward, there's opportunity and opportunity to do something differently. And to me, that's a distinction between feed forward and feedback.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I think very well summed up.
So very interesting. So Alex, I've been calling what you called feed forward feedback, because to me, naturally, I think the right thing to give people feedback is to tell them what to consider next in terms of moving forward, right? So, but I naturally still call it feedback because at that moment it comes as feedback. So I just thought that was interesting.
Yeah. So it could be somewhat terminology, but I think when we make it that there is a distinction, it actually helps people to think differently, right? That go, oh, I didn't do the forward part of the back of the feedback, right? I didn't do the.
We're gonna have new terms for every single bit of this kind of thing happening, though. Like for me, that's a struggle. Like that's a genuine struggle I have. Like for every single time that we have to come up with a new term to give feedback, you need to give feed forward. It's like so eventually let's just replace it. No feedback, just feed forward.
Yeah. I mean, it could all be lumped up to one, right? So I mean, for me, at the end of the day, it's the way we codify in our heads. But as long as it helps us to guide our thinking and behaviors in a way that we provide this information to people, I think that is my endpoint, right? It doesn't really matter if you have rolled up this whole thing as part of feedback, or you're going to replace the whole term as feed forward. But the end result is behaviorally, we help to direct people to look into the future, provide suggestions so that they have more hope, in terms of where they are going, rather than get stuck with, oh, I've done this, now I'm stuck, it's terrible for me. So that whole forward-looking piece, whether you call it feedback, feed forward, doesn't matter. But if you have that piece incorporated into your communication to the person, I think that's what's important. Yep. Hey guys, so time flew with 5 minutes left before we end at 1.5 hours. So I told you this would be a very, very interesting conversation, right? And then especially since we have Jeffers and Pilin joining us, so we have a lot more inputs.
Thank you so much, gentlemen.
Thanks for joining us. The next round, we're still going to talk about feedback, I believe, about giving online feedback. And
using
how that's
text,
going to change.
I think, so I think that's also what we wanted to talk about previously, right? So it's really about the fact that we are struggling with online version of feedback because you can't see the reactions and there's no warmth in the voice. Yeah, that kind of little things. You're not right next to the person. You can't give them a hug. You can't do all these different things that really matter, right? Like, and even with a gathering of 5 people, like, let's be honest here. Like, you get there, but plenty of people are still going to be scared and staying at home. And work from home is going to be a norm for a lot of people. So giving feedback online is going to be very, very important.
Yep. So we're gonna cover more of that next week on Tuesday. Sorry, in my meetup group I put it at 7 p.m. It's 8 p.m. 8 p.m. every Tuesday for us to just get together, talk online about the topic, just share information and learn from one another. And that's really the essence of the Quick Connect live sessions that we have. And look forward to seeing you and even the rest of you who is texting and watching on Facebook Live to join us live, because that's where the conversation and the essence of the discussion comes about, right?
People are just enjoying us, they don't need to join. Like, that's why
they are enjoying us. That's great.
Can say that. Sorry, I just want to listen. I don't want to bother. I don't want to bother you guys.
Your friend who came in and pop out, right?
Yeah.
It's like one of those, imagine physically, right? Open the door, look, right? Turn around, close it.
Yes. It's good that he sent you a message to clear things up. Otherwise, you'll be wondering what's happening.
Yeah, precisely. And I appreciate my friends. Like, for example, Evan messaging me to call me out on my own bullshit. So thank you. That's good feedback.
It's 1-to-1. He's not doing it here live.
No, but see, I get to bring it up to you guys because I dare to.
Yeah, thanks for being authentic.
Yeah, Evan didn't even put it in the chat box, right? It's like personal message.
Yeah. It's not even on the comments, because the comment, like, there's been no comment since my friend Ben and another friend
Joel,
Ken message on my thing. So it's quite good. It's all good. But I really enjoyed this session. I'm really happy that we have this session. I think that I'm glad to have Jeffers and Palin. I think we need to have more people with StrengthsFinder they know their top 5s, because it's actually quite fun with this in place.
Yes, I think so. Yeah. We're going to poke fun at each other.
And then it really comes out, right?
Because I have got high harmony, but if I look at the person with high self-assurance, I can be, I can be a little bit more direct, but I will still be nice. I try to.
It's like giving her the permission to, he doesn't feel so worried about offending you.
Yeah, I think I'm like quite careful, especially if I meet you for the very first time. I better be very sensitive to your feelings. But I think from what I've seen from Ethan's interaction, he's like quite a bold and confident person. So
I mean, I think more importantly is I'm okay with not being okay. So if I get offended, I'll be like, okay, I'm offended. Why am I being offended?
You'll be thinking, like, what is it happening? What's my self-belief and all that? What can I change?
Yeah, I spend a lot of time doing that. Like, whenever I'm going through a very bad time, I'm just more like, okay, I'm not okay. Why?
But you're okay with not being okay, and that's important, right? Because the opposite is it becomes a negative spiral. It's like, I'm not okay. I'm not okay. And I'm not okay about not being okay. Oh, crap. I'm not okay about not being okay about not being okay.
It's good. He doesn't even blame the other person. He's like thinking, why am I reacting this way? What's happening? What's my internal dialogue?
Like I said, I need to be beyond reproach. Oh no, because when I grew up, I was very quick to blame. So I had to learn how to negate all those thought processes and even remove the trauma to be able to go into like, okay, where am I taking a responsibility in this? Because actually, especially if you are coaching or training, if you do not think like this, you'll start blaming your trainees
That's
and your
it.
coachees, which is ridiculous. Like as a teacher or as an educator or as a trainer, it's so important that I live by example. Made it very
Wow.
awkward, sorry.
That takes a lot of, no, I'm just thinking because that takes a lot of hard work, the rewiring part and rewire
it
the
does.
way that you think.
It
So
does.
that's commendable.
It's fun.
And I believe that we are all growing and changing along the way. So we're all growing in different areas. I'm learning about things like trauma and whatnot from Ethan, right? It's a new buzzword now. Every time I see something related to trauma or tag Ethan on social media, I say, Ethan, this is you, this is yours, right? So I think we are learning with each other all the time. And Chinese, there's a saying, right? 三人行，必有我师. When there are three people traveling together, there will be someone who can teach you something. So yeah, and that's why I appreciate the community and all of us coming together to have this conversation. And I hope that you all will join us again next week. And for wherever you're available, just make some time. We come together and we're going to have this awesome conversation.
Hey, Evan, next time join us, Ken.
Yes. 5 persons on the screen.
Yeah, we can easily take. I think Zoom can take 16, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So we can easily have 16 person at the screen at one time. And if there are more than 16, doesn't matter, right? We can mix things around if we need to. But when we have that, we have more conversations and it will be more interesting.
Oh no, Evan apologized for not asking for permission to give me feedback. So I mean, it's because part of Dakota are listening, right? So under summary, we have this thing where we had to give caveat before giving feedback, but because high self-assurance.
You're giving now blanket approval, right? You don't have to ask permission.
Just don't be an asshole. Just don't be too brutal about it.
Was that like a hidden feedback to?
No,
that's a hidden intention, setting his intention.
Evan is great. Evan has been always giving very good constructive feedback. But at the same time, it's like there are people who just go like, oh, you're just spotting rubbish, which doesn't help with the situation, right? That's bad feedback, right? So
Yep, absolutely. So thanks everyone. I'm going to end the broadcast here and join us the next time as well. See you.
Okay.
See you.
Thank
See you.
you.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Really enjoy you guys. Bye.